next up, we are going to start with watercolor techniques in ART1 class, and we're going to create our technique sheet, which looks a lot like this, pretty much identical. So I'm going to show you how to set that up. So first, you need about a 9x12 sheet of paper, no smaller, and it should be drawing paper or watercolor paper. If you picked up supplies in the office, I gave you a sheet for this, and it's watercolor paper. So you go ahead and grab that and follow along with me, and I'll give you some time in the middle of this video to set that up so you can follow along. So across the top of your 9x12 sheet of paper, so mark at the 2, the 4, the 6, and the 8, and you'll have a 1 inch left on the right side. Okay, so every 2 inches, also mark at the bottom so you can have straight lines, and we'll connect the dots. So 2, 4, 6, and 8. Then before I mark those lines, I'm going to go every inch along the 12-inch side of my paper. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and we're going to stop at 9. So don't go any further than 9. Then do that on the other side. Make sure that these lines are across from the marks that we just made. So 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm going to go ahead and connect these lines across. I'm going to do the same to the top. However, I'm going to stop at this 9-inch mark. I'm not going to go all the way to the bottom. I'm going to stop at my last line made. And then this last line that's 1 inch goes all the way down. Okay, so this is the only line goes to the bottom, and then you should have all of this ready to go, and your name is going to go in the top right with your hour. So we have first or your 6th, first 6 hour. Okay, and then we're ready to do some techniques. So go ahead and get this ready. Techniques, we're going to go ahead and start painting in these spaces that you created. The last step that you might have missed is doing 2 circles on the bottom section. So what I did is I just found something in the house that had a circle base that fit, and then I just traced that in the bottom, and then we'll be painting those in as we go. So let's get started with our first technique. And that would be flat wash. So I'm going to draw an arrow to the right and write flat wash. And then first by starting to get your brush wet, and then the color that you want to use first, also wet. So I'm going to rinse my brush off, and I'm going to add straight water to get this space wet. So flat wash is good for any area that is large, like a background, a sky, big spaces that you want to paint in quickly right away with just one basic color. So I'm going to dip into my paint that's wet, and I'm going to let the water spread it, and it'll kind of do its own thing without me having to work too hard to spread the paint around. And if I have too much water, it's kind of puddling up a little bit at the top, I can also take a paper towel and dab that up so I don't have it too big of a mess. Okay, so you paint plain water down first, and then you add a paint color, and that is flat wash. Next is graduated wash. Okay, graduated wash is a lot like a value scale, where we go from dark to light gradually. So I'm gonna just pick another color on my paints, get it wet. I'm gonna pick a darker color so that you can see this more. I'm gonna pick blue. And I'm going to paint a thin line that's nice and dark across the top of my page. And then quickly, before it dries too much, I'm gonna go rinse my brush off with plain water on my brush, no paint. I'm gonna pull it down so that it kind of runs out of paint by the end, and it goes from dark to light from top to bottom. Okay, so if it's not dark enough at the top, I can also add more blue if I need to, if I need it to be more gradual and not so sudden stopping in the middle. So you should have a lighter value and a darker value at the top. Okay, so next one is thin line, and I'm gonna write this below where I just painted so they don't run together. And an arrow to the left. And as a keynote for flat wash, you can write water first, as a key reminder that you can use water first before you paint that one. So for thin line, I'm gonna get my brush wet, kind of dry it off a little bit on a paper towel so it's not soaking wet. And I'm gonna take my hairs on my brush and I'm gonna pull them to a point on the tip. Natural haired brushes are great for doing this. Synthetic brushes kind of already have a point depending on what you're using. So make sure you have a natural haired brush. Dip into a paint that's already wet. And I can draw shapes. So this is like drawing with a thin line. That one's fairly simple. Next is going to be dry brush. Arrow to the left. And so make sure you dry your brush off first on paper towel. Make sure it's not completely soaking wet. I'm also gonna get my paint wet that I'm gonna use first, just a little bit, not too much, before I dry it off, so make sure my paint is ready. Then I'm gonna take the hairs, and this time I'm going to spread them apart so it's kind of like a fan. And then dip into the paint I'm going to use, just the tips, not the whole brush, just the tips. And I'm just gonna feather it, and it creates a texture. Kind of scratchy lines. And I can repeat the process if I want more. This is great for hair, great for grass, anything that's really rough. You could also paint the background first, and then when it dries, do a dry brush on top as well. What we're gonna do is blotting. So I'm going to paint a water circle. So I'm just gonna do with just pure water. Paint a circle and then dip into the color that I want. that dry for a second. So we're gonna come back to that in a little bit. So don't pause this video. This is important that some things that we're gonna do are time sensitive. So don't pause and get up and come back in an hour. Stick this one out for a second and then you will see what blotting is. So while that dries, we're gonna go on to free flow. And just like flat wash, we're gonna paint the entire space with just water. Make sure you get a fairly good amount on there, not a big puddle, but get your space wet with clean water. And I'm gonna pick several colors for this one to make sure my paints are wet. Okay, and I'm gonna select my first color and I'm just gonna drop it in there and let the paint flow on its own. It's kind of like little fireworks or little cells like you look through a microscope. Then I can pick a second color and drop it in there as well. This is a great blurring effect. This could be like a flowers in a bush. You could do a lot of things with free flow, especially for a background. I might pick even a third color. And it really is uncontrolled. You can't really control where the paint goes with this one. You just kind of let it be. And for this technique, you're going to need a white pastel or a white crayon. Something that's waxy that will be resisting the paint. So pause this video if you need to go grab that. I want you to draw a shape. You can also write your initials. I'm gonna just do my initials, and it's in white, so it's kind of hard to see. And because wax and water, they don't like each other, when we paint over top of this, the paint should repel or resist where the wax is. Which it does. So it's kind of like a magic trick. So anytime you want in a painting an area that is white, or you want to block out an area but you don't want paint there to go there at all in the painting, you're going to want to use wax resist, especially for like a little white twinkle in somebody's eye. You can put a little white dot there so that the paint doesn't flow into that spot. So wax resist is great for any white areas you might want. Okay. Then the next technique, you're going to need salt. So grab some salt from your salt shaker off your kitchen table. And so I've grabbed a salt grinder. So I'm gonna take the salt and I'm gonna just kind of grind it a little bit on my paper towel that I have. And then I'm gonna use it after I paint. So I'm first gonna start with a flat wash. And you also want to pick a dark color for this one so you can kind of see it work. It's hard to see with yellow. So I'm going to stick with purple. I'm going to cover that area up. Then I'm going to grab my salt, not waiting too long, and I'm going to sprinkle the salt immediately in that space. So it's important you have the salt right next to you so you can kind of grab it before it dries too much. And you'll see that the salt kind of soaks up the paint. It's almost like when we put salt on ice outside in the wintertime. The salt makes the ice melt because it kind of soaks up all the moisture and it cures it. It does the same thing to paint, okay? So we are gonna take the salt off right now because we gotta let it dry and then we'll rub it off when it is all dry. So that was salt resist. So another resist. Anytime it's a resist, it's something that takes paint away or keeps paint from going somewhere. Next one we have is plastic wrap. And you're gonna need saran wrap or some kind of plastic from your kitchen that you use to cover leftover food. We're actually gonna make this space bigger, so I'm gonna erase this line right here. Make sure that this space above is dry. It's very important that when we paint next to spaces that you either leave a gap or that space is dry so they do not bleed together. So I have basic kitchen plastic wrap, and I'm only gonna need a little piece. Not a ton, so I'm gonna put this down and rip off a little bit. Okay, then I'm going to paint this any color I want. I could do a flat wash. Once again, it's a big space. I just want one color, so we're gonna do water first. Do orange this time. Okay, and then I'm going to kind of crinkle up and bunch. Actually, I'm going to rip this in half a little bit. Then I'm going to lay the plastic wrap on top of the paint. And I'm looking for some texture so you can kind of see right away some lines that are being created because of the plastic wrap. So that is what we're looking for. We're gonna let that dry before we pick that up. So that is a plastic wrap technique. I don't really have a fancy name for it. It could be a kind of resist because it takes paint into one area as well. Okay, so the next thing you need is alcohol or nail polish remover. So this can be called alcohol resist. And we're also going to erase away this line. Okay, so my salt resist is still fairly wet, so I'm going to kind of leave a gap in between because I don't want those bleeding together. I want it to be left alone. So I couldn't find alcohol at the moment, but I did find nail polish remover, and I just poured it into a little dish or a little cup, and that's all I need. I don't need much more than a teaspoon of that. It's very little, just kind of a splash. So I'm first going to paint this space. Let's see, I'm going to do, let's do green. I'm gonna do a flat wash. I'm gonna dip into the green. Let that spread around. I kind of want this to be a little bit dark, so I'm gonna add a lot of paint. More paint than water. Then I'm gonna rinse off my brush, dry it off a little bit, and then I'm gonna take it and dip it into the alcohol or paint, nail polish remover. Most of you should have either of these things at home. And I'm going to drop it, and it's going to make little ringlets or bubbles into the paint. So it also resists it because it makes the water evaporate so fast. It's almost like a little chemical reaction happening. Okay, and that's alcohol resist. I just realized I spelled that wrong. There we go. Alrighty. With that, we're gonna pause up here, down there, and we're gonna go up to our blotting because it's had time to dry a little bit. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to kind of re-dampen. Oh gosh, I just put alcohol right there. I'm going to dampen that side. And I'm gonna take paper towel. And this is when you make mistakes. If you ever make a mistake on your watercolor paper, blotting is what you wanna do. And it is going to lift off some paint. even if it's a puddle or anything like that. Blotting is a technique every single one of you will use, especially for mistakes, too much water, or if you just simply want the area to be lighter than you actually put down the first time. So that is what blotting does. Make sure you rinse off your brush because I just put alcohol straight into that. Make sure you use water. And we are done with the alcohol, so you can go ahead and dump that out so you don't get too confused. Then we're gonna jump down to our circles. And these are going to be our color wheels. So we're gonna draw a really wide X and then a line down the middle in both of them. And then we're gonna label them red, R for red, O for orange, Y for yellow, G for green, B for blue, and violet for purple. Okay, so for this one, we're gonna do a couple of different things than you might expect. So we're gonna start with yellow to start with. So we're gonna paint yellow on this entire half of the color wheel, and then we're gonna let that dry. And you'll see in a minute why we're doing what we're doing. So I'm gonna paint this whole half yellow. Okay, then I'm gonna jump over to this color wheel where this one is going to be all straight color. So you'll see as a sample of what each color looks like when you don't paint any mixes or too much water. So I'm gonna do every other space because I need to let spaces dry. So I'm gonna paint the violet. I'm gonna skip over red and do orange. Notice how I'm always leaving spaces, only because I don't want things to bleed together. And then when these dry, then I can paint next to it. This is gonna be so key to all of your paintings that we do, that you let things dry before you rush and start painting the whole paper. Watercolor takes patience, and I cannot stress that enough, that you have to be patient and let it dry. Unless you have a hairdryer at home, that kind of speeds things up a bit as well. Just don't blow it full force because it'll move all the water around and drip. So you can kind of see it kind of touched that orange right at the tip of the green and it bled just a tiny bit. Okay, so I'm gonna let those dry and I'm gonna jump back up here to all my other techniques. And then we're going to erase this line on the side. And this is going to be our stippling technique. So we all know what stippling is from drawing techniques, and it is doing lots of little dots. So how we do this one is we get our brush wet, pick a color, and then I'm going to kind of take my finger and I'm going to tap it. And it is going to get a little messy, but by tapping my finger instead of flicking the brush, I can somewhat control where my splatters go. And it also creates a texture as well. I can also mix or do different colors with this technique also. So I'm gonna do red. It's very important that your brush is kind of wet. Otherwise, if it's not wet enough, it doesn't really have floppy room in the hairs to do anything. You can kind of notice it got everywhere else up on the paper. So it's a bit out of control. You can even do that as well. That's a different way of messing around with the paints. So when we do our paintings, I don't want you calling this splatter. It is called stippling. That is the artistic technique for this one. All right. This color wheel at the bottom is now somewhat dry. So the next step you're going to do is paint over top of violet, red, and orange with red. And so that means we are overlapping colors because orange already has yellow in it, which means yellow and orange, or yellow and red make orange. So this is overlap color technique where you can overlap dry colors to make a new color. So I'm going to take red, kind of a watery red. I'm going to paint over top of all these, and you can kind of see that orange finally turns into orange. I don't go straight back for paint. I kind of rely on water to paint the rest of the space to move that paint around. So don't always think you have to always go back for more paint. Just go back for more water and it will do its job. Okay, and then we're gonna let that dry and then we'll finish the rest of it. This side is also somewhat dry at the moment too, and I'm gonna paint the rest of that color wheel. Okay, it kind of bled into my blue. That wasn't dry enough, so that's where blotting will come in handy, and I can blot that bleed away. So, told you, you're gonna use blotting more than you think with that paper towel. Okay, and then we're getting into mixing some colors. So we only have a few left to do on our technique sheet, and it's going to be a lot of mixing colors. So we kind of already did that with our 100 watercolor challenge. However, we're going to start with how do we mix like the color that we want, and how do we get different values of it. So we're going to do every color on the color wheel in 3 different ways. So we're going to start with red. And below the alcohol resist labeling, we're gonna draw double bars. So I'm gonna draw 2 lines and divide up this box into 3 sections. This bar in between helps us leave a gap for when we paint there. And then I'm gonna write an R in the middle. And the first one we're gonna do is red plus water. And then in the top part of our paint palette, we're gonna take some red, and then we're gonna add a loaded brush with water on it for a lighter red value. Okay, be careful of how much water you add to your brush because this could create a pretty big puddle. And then I'm gonna paint in that space, stopping at the bar bracket so that these 2 paints don't blend together. So don't rush this, take your time. It can get messy if you're not careful. Then next to the red plus water will be a straight red. So I'm not adding any water to it, I'm just taking a wet brush into the red. So that you can kind of see the difference between red plus water, a red, and then a darker red. Now instead of adding black to make a darker red, the black watercolor can be really awful and a terror of colors. It can really take a color and just immediately turn that color into black, even if it's just a drop. So we're gonna avoid using red or black with any color at all by using a color called its complement. Now a complementary color is any color across from each other on the color wheel. So red's complement directly across from it on the wheel is green, and we're gonna use green as the color to make it darker. So I'm gonna take my red mixture, make sure there's enough red up there take a clean brush, go into the green, and add a little bit to make a darker red. Now this color is no longer recognizable as a red, so I added a little bit too much green, which means I have to add more red so that I can see that red come back and is now a darker, more of a mahogany or a maroon red. Then I'm gonna paint that next to my straight red that's in the middle. And that's how you get a darker red naturally. So that is red plus green. Next, we're going to take the green and do the same thing. So divide up your space. G in the middle. And we're going to repeat this process for all colors. So this is going to be green plus water. Straight green. I'm going to add its complement. So we know red's complement is green, which means green's complement is red. It goes back and forth the same way. So I'm going to add a little bit more green and a touch of red, and it makes it a subtly darker green. Green. Okay, and we're going to jump down and do the same thing for all the other colors. So then I'm going to hop over here. jump down, we're gonna finish this top half. Other things that you can do at the moment is that your saran wrap is probably dry, so that can come off as well. The salt is also probably dry, and you can kind of take your finger and smear that around and brush the salt off if your paper is dry. It should leave somewhat of a speckled texture. Mine's kind of hard to really see, but you should see some dots from where the salt soaked it up. Okay, so we have to finish our overlap color wheel and do one more technique in this corner. So in your overlap color wheel, we still have violet, blue, and green to cover up because red, orange, and yellow were done. So blue will be used to make violet with red, and blue will make green with yellow. So just take a blue, kind of water it down just a tad, and then you're gonna overlap it. You should get somewhat of a green and then somewhat of a violet up there as well. Okay. Then our last technique on here is going to be in this long strip of a corner. And in here we're going to do wet to wet blend. Okay. So first, we're gonna pick two colors. Pick two colors that go well together. You may have noticed in all of these mixtures in this section, when you added the complement, it kind of made it darker into a brown scent, so it got kind of uglier or ucky, but that's how you naturally take down the saturation. You neutralize the color to make it darker. For wet to wet blend, think of things like sunset colors, watercolors, things that go well together, that make things blend. So the colors that are next to each other on the color wheel are great. Opposites, not so much because it makes a brown in the middle. So I am going to pick red to start. So I'm gonna pick red to paint at the top, and I'm going to go down about halfway. And then immediately pick my other color, which is yellow. And I'm gonna start from the bottom and work my way up towards that red, where they kind of conjoin in the middle and they mix together. If it goes too far, I can kind of take a clean brush and patch it up a little bit and pull it where it's not too blotchy, and I can also take a paper towel and blot it up a bit. Okay, so that's wet to wet blend, and that is your technique sheet. So make sure your name is in the top corner, take a picture of this and turn it in on canvas. The last thing you should do is always clean out the lid of your watercolor. So use a paper towel and wet paper towel and kind of rub it clean, especially those of you that have an egg carton. Make sure your lid is clean before you close it.